Welcome to Trainz! Hello there, friends, and welcome to Trainz Reviews. My name is Kevin, and today we're going to talk about the Norfolk Western Class J, number 611, as represented by MTH, Lionel, and, if I can have my third arm here, Williams. So stay tuned. We're going to start with this Williams O-gauge version of the Class J locomotive. Now it's the Williams 5601, and this one was released around 1991. And price at time of filming is $418.76 for this particular example, which is Trainz SKU 5915104. So let's go ahead and pop it out of the packaging and see what we got. Norfolk Western is well known for designing and building their own locomotives in their Roanoke shops, and the Class J was no exception. This powerful 484 was intended for passenger service. And the streamlining, actually, they did not hire out an industrial designer, but rather their very own Franklin C. Knoll went through a couple different iterations before finally landing on this version. And his wife, Louise Knoll, was the one who suggested the paint scheme of black, Tuscan red, and gold. So a homegrown effort. Now this Williams example was released in 1991. It features brass construction, smoke, lighting on the rear and the front, and it requires 072 curves. So this is a big locomotive that needs a big layout to run. If we flip it over, you can see that the leading and trailing drivers are flanged, but the two center drivers are blind to help you navigate tighter curves without derailing. Now, recessed into the skyline casing here, we do have some detailed pieces, including a bell, which is cast in place, it does not move, an array of safety valves, we've got our whistle over here, and some other different features. On the real locomotive, you can kind of tell here we're duplicating Timken roller bearings on the connecting rods, which helped reduce friction and made for easier running of the locomotive. It also featured Baker valve gear. And unusually for a passenger locomotive, the drivers are only 70 inches tall. Compare that to the 80-inch drivers that you would find on a Hudson or a Pennsylvania Railroad K4S. However, even though they have small drivers, because they used roller bearings on everything that they possibly could, and they extensively counterbalanced, these locomotives are capable of running up to 100 miles per hour easily. However, with every good there is a bad. Due to their very well counterbalanced system, they were sensitive to substandard track. Now some other features on this model here. We do have the handrail running from the front of the boiler all the way back to the cab. We have our fireman and engineer inside, and our coal load on the tender is individually applied pieces that have been glued down. So a very hefty, weighty locomotive, but visually very appealing. Now let's take a look at this MTH 20-3024-1, which is a Proto-Sound 1 version released in 1997. In addition to the Proto-Sound 1, it also has Proto-Smoke. And unlike the Williams version, which required the 072 curves, this one only needs 054. Now the biggest difference between the MTH version here and the Williams version we were looking at just a moment ago is the paint finish. On the MTH we are using a matte finish, whereas the Williams was a gloss finish. Otherwise, details are pretty similar, which would be expected since we're replicating a real-world locomotive. We have our smokestack, our chimney, funnel, however you want to say it. We have our bell, which on this version is not cast in place. It does move around. Safety valves, whistle. We have handrails running along the length of the boiler. The cab vents are molded in place, so they're stationary, they don't open. Fireman and engineer. And then moving to the tender, we have individually applied pieces of coal. 611 in particular was part of the last batch of the Class J's that were built. And some of the distinguishing features when she was first introduced include the pilot wheels up front. They were cast as a solid piece rather than the spoked wheel design of earlier locomotives. Now, the earlier batches were eventually upgraded to the solid cast wheel as they went through rebuilds. Another tell, the rear deck of the tender is flat on 611 and her batch, whereas in the earlier batches, it was kind of curved. So minor spotting differences, but if you ever want to pull out some trivia, there you go. Now, last but certainly not least, we have our Lionel version. Now, this is the Lionel 6-38095. Trainz SKU is 5927080. It is also categorized as a C7 in our ranking system. It was released in 2006, and this particular example is currently available on the website for $1,187.99. Now, it features Rail Sounds 5.0, synchronized smoke unit, flickering firebox glow, which is a fun one to try and say 5 times fast, a die-cast body, and like the earlier MTH version, this is also capable of running on 054 curves. So let's take a look, shall we? Now, one cool thing about the Lionel version that I did not see in the others, it has the correct bell placement for 611 in particular. So if you see way down here under the pilot, that's where 611's batch had their bells, as opposed to up here on the top of the boiler. Now, the MTH and the Williams versions had their bells up here, which would be accurate for the mid-war or pre-war batches of the Class J. So if you're looking for pinpoint historical authenticity, this Lionel version might be the one that you want to look for. Otherwise, a lot of the same details. Detail pieces are a little finer and more intricate though. So we still have our handrails. We also have handrails around the boiler front. We've got our safety valves. We have our whistle. On the other side, and we'll try and show this, there is linkage for operating the steam whistle. The cab windows are picked out in orange. We have our fireman and we have our engineer. The cab vents on the roof actually do move, which is a nice little addition because the previous two did not have that feature. And then our coal load is, again, individual pieces glued down, and they're more finely ground. They're not as big and coarse. They're more finely ground, which might be a more scale accurate appearance. Now, 611 is not what I would consider the luckiest of locomotives. During its initial operation with Norfolk and Western, it had 7 different grade crossing collisions with vehicles, including one where it hit a tractor trailer hauling ice cream. And the locomotive continued on to Cincinnati, but absolutely covered in ice cream. So maybe she likes dessert? It's hard to tell. Now we're talking about lucky versus unlucky. 611 back in, let's see, 1956, January 22nd, 1956. It was hauling the Pocahontas passenger train, and it happened to be running late. In order to make up time, the engineer was pushing the speed, probably a little bit more than he should have. And in a section of track where the speed limit was 20 to 30 miles per hour, he was doing 50, almost 60. As the locomotive went through the curve, it derailed and crashed down into the Tug Fork River. Unfortunately, the engineer was killed, 60 others were wounded. But it was due to this accident that we have 611 today. Rather than scrap the locomotive, which pretty much any other railroad company would have done, it was instead restored, rebuilt at a cost of $75,000 in 1956 money, which is about $1 million, or just under $1 million in today's money. So when they started retiring steam locomotives in 1958, as they approached dieselization in 1960, 611 was in the best of shape. It had just gone through a massive rebuild. Initially, they were going to let her go too. Winston Link, a famous railroad photographer, offered to buy her, but was turned down. But then a year later, Norfolk and Western decided that they were going to donate 611 to the Virginia Museum of Transportation. Now, in 1981, the locomotive was restored to operating status, and it was used by Norfolk Southern for their steam tours. And unfortunately, in 1986, she was involved in another accident, this time hauling a passenger train of almost 1,000 Norfolk Southern employees through the Great Dismal Swamp. There was a derailment. The issue was later back in the train with the passenger cars rather than the locomotive itself. No one was killed. 177 people were injured, however, and 18 were airlifted to the hospital. Now, the locomotive continued in operation for a little bit longer before being retired again in 1994. We've got all three examples here in front of us now to help you better see some of the smaller differences. Up front, we have our Williams version, which again, around $400, a little bit over, has the gloss finish as its major distinguishing feature, and requires 072 curves. We switch over to the MTH version in the middle, around $700. It's a Proto-Sound 1 locomotive, and matte finish, it still has the incorrect for 611 bell placement on top of the boiler. Then we come to our Lionel version, which is around $1,200. It has the correct bell placement down underneath. It has the matte finish, just like the MTH one does, but we do have cab windows picked out in orange. We have opening cab vents on top. Some other small details you can see, the Williams boiler does not feature any seams or rivets, unlike the MTH or the Lionel. It's up to you to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Looking at the coal loads again, Williams and MTH use larger pieces of coal, whereas the Lionel has smaller pieces of coal. So, personal preference, is it more scale accurate to have the smaller pieces or the larger pieces? I will leave that detail up to you. What I can say is that all three locomotives are just absolutely beautiful and would look wonderful on any layout that you happen to have, especially since right now 611 is a touring locomotive. You know, you might have a modern railroad at your home. Nothing saying you can't have an excursion train come visiting through. So what a fantastic locomotive, huh? Whether you model an O gauge, HO, N, there are plenty of versions and plenty of different scales by tons of different manufacturers. So you're guaranteed to find one that works for you at your price point. And of course, Trainz.com has what you need. So until next week, please like and subscribe if you'd be so kind. And remember, keep your rails clean.
Trainz.com, making dreams come true, one train at a time.